Hey everyone, I'm Jasper, and today I'm going to be talking about motion prototyping in XD. So a little bit about me. I just finished third year, so I'm a rising senior in UX Shared and Design. Um, and last summer interned as a product designer for Facebook. And I just wrapped up a term doing graphic design work for my university's marketing team. You can talk to me about anything like books, anime, fitness, fashion, anything goes. You can just slide into my DMs or on Instagram or just tweet. And this is my handle. So today we're gonna talk about the basics of setting up a file efficiently on Adobe XD. So I'm gonna go over the 8-point grid system and why you should be using that, as well as going over some features in Auto-Animate, which is pretty helpful if you want to create some interactions and micro interactions in Adobe XD, because Smart Animate on Figma tends to be a little bit, can be a little bit wonky sometimes if you're trying to get a bit fancy. And lastly, we will end this off with some general career advice on just getting into product design as someone with no experience. So yeah, let's get into it. So one of the key reasons why we want to be able to do animations and micro interactions is because it creates user delight. So why is user delight important? Well, it helps users want to feel acknowledged, because users want to be treated as humans and they don't want to be just treated as robots. So that means oftentimes they want to feel excitement when they use a product or a service. And lastly, users want to feel competent. So users want to feel like they know how to do a certain flow, how to use a certain product or use a certain feature. And that's where micro interactions help and really make the user know what they're doing, and it gives them feedback. And this is important because for the business, for the actual product, it makes users want to come back even when they don't want to. And that ultimately means more revenue for the product. So a good example is reactions on Facebook. So if you hover over the like button, you can see like all the different types of reactions. And if you hover over each type of reaction, like it gets bigger, right? And then when you select it, it applies. So that's like one instance of using interactions, micro interactions, to foster user delight in a product. Okay, so yeah, right now I'm just gonna go over a demo inside of Adobe XD. So you guys can just open up XD if you have it and just like follow along with me. I might also like post a file that I make after in the Discord chat. Okay, sweet. So in the beginning, I kind of referenced how to set up your grid for mobile. So essentially, right now I'm using an iPhone X. And what you can do to get the exact dimension for this is you can go inside, I think it's when you first open up XD, you'll see this page. So then you can go on the drop down and you can pretty much select whatever one you want. So in this case, we're gonna go with iPhone X. Yes. So the one that says 375 by 812. Yeah, so it'll automatically give you this, and this is what you should see. But in order to actually use the 8-point grid, we have to manually set it up ourselves. So for myself, this is what I recommend. So this is a grid system. And essentially, it's a 6-column grid. And in the professional industry, like we recommend using a 6-point grid. just because it's not too many columns, but it's also like not too few. And so the reason why we call it an 8-point grid is because 8 is sort of the most modular number. Because when you're designing, the resolution is 375 by 812. But when it actually gets outputted onto the actual phone screen, like I have an iPhone here, this resolution on the iPhone is actually much bigger. So it needs to be able to scale up, and sometimes it needs to be able to scale down. So essentially, if you have an 8-point, so if you have something that's like 8 pixels, pretending that this is 8 pixels, if it's 1.5 times of that, it becomes 6 actually. So if it's a nice modular and even number without any like decimals. And then if you scale 8 up by 2, pretending that this is 2, it'll be 16. So these are like nice plain numbers to work with. So I'm just gonna, oops. So yeah, that's like the rationale why we want an 8-point grid. So then essentially how I set it up is I usually have 6 columns here, and the width, the gutter width, I set it at 24. So that's the space in between the columns. So that's 24. And then the column width, I have it set as 37. So each column is 37 pixels. And then for the margin, it's going to be about 16, because 375 over here, the width of the template, is not a even number. So we have to kind of make do with 17 and 16 on these two sides over here. So you can just like screenshot this and like copy my settings. So like that's typically how we lay out a grid in mobile. And then essentially like all the text will fall within this grid. And all our elements would essentially like line up with this grid. So I could have like a button that's like that, or I could have a button that stretches all the way, but it has to live within this grid. And we sort of just use it as alignment. So it's a quick way to be consistent with all your text and image sizes. So that's that. And essentially, what we're going to be making today is going to be this little micro interaction. So I'll just preview it. So we have this like fake screen over here. And then it's got like a triangle pointing up in the middle, and it's pink. And there's a stroke over here. Essentially, when you click on next, we're going to make it so that it flips around, and the arrow enlarges a little bit, and it rotates. And that pink circle, it gets a little bit smaller. So I'll just play it one more time. Yeah. So to do this, da, da, da. So if you have your 8-point grid set up, okay, we'll roll with that for now. We'll start off by, first of all, making a circle. And we can just make this any color we want. I'll try to match it with the pink. And then for the border, we'll set this as a border. We'll make the fill nothing. We can make this like, I think I did some crazy number, like 12. So for the dash gap, we can set this to be 1000. And the actual dash, you can make it like 120. You can also align it. So we have like a bunch of neat tools here on the left-hand side. So one of these is the center align. So you can center align here. And you can also center align vertically. So I'm just going to adjust it so that it somewhat falls in line here. Maybe make it a little bit bigger. Something like that. So that's going to be your starting point for where that little stroke is. And we're going to make it rotate later on. So you can make this any color you want. Might be a little too crazy. And for the triangle, you could just make it like this. And you can place it right in the center, like so. So this is going to be the base that you're working off of. I guess I'll demo the actual shape first and the basics of Auto-Animate. The text sliding in and out, I can go over briefly if there's time. But essentially, this is your starting point. So you can essentially duplicate this. So this is your starting point, and then you can make your end result the second. So I think we said we wanted to make this smaller. We want to make this bigger. So then here, we can change the color. We can do whatever we want. And I'm going to rotate this. So it goes here. And this thing, I think I made the stroke bigger. I'm also going to round them out. I forgot to do that. But we can make it bigger. And if we want, we can change the color. I might make it like an orange. And here we can essentially, we can rotate it. So I'm going to rotate it 180. So it falls onto the other side. The other thing I'm going to make is actually a little button. And that's just so that we have something to click with to trigger the animation. So it doesn't have to be too fancy. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to do away with text. And using our grid system, we can just make this like end to end. Next. And I'm going to group them together. So on a Mac, that's Command G. And on a PC, grouping the text and the rectangle underneath is going to be Control G. So all you have to do is select these two, and then Command G or Control G, depending on your operating system. I'm just going to take this and dump it in here. And I'm going to call this, instead of next, I'm going to call it back because we want to be able to go back to our previous state. So that's essentially all the building blocks that we have. So what we're going to do is now animate it. And to do that in XD, we're going to go into prototype. And so we have the prototype screen here. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to click on this group. So this button that we made, that's why like I grouped it so that when you click anywhere in this button, it'll trigger the animation. So I'm going to go here, click it, and you'll see this little blue arrow. You can click this and you can go and just drag it until it clicks onto this screen. And so when you go in here, this is the fun part. So in this panel, you get to see all your interaction controls. And this step is pretty easy to actually trigger all the controls. All you have to do is click on that drop down that says animation. So currently it's set at dissolve, but we want it to, actually, we want to keep it at dissolve. What we want to change is the type. So instead of transition, click into this type drop down and select Auto-Animate. And then for easing, you can play around with all these different options, but we're going to keep ease out for now. And then for duration, I'm going to change it to from 0.3 to 1. And this is all stuff that you can play around. But I think that I found that just personally for me, 1 second works the best for this scenario. So that's what we're going to do. And then, so the idea is that once we do this, once we click next, it's going to trigger the animation. And because all the layers are the exact same, because we copied the artboard, and they're also the same name and the same type of layer, the animation is just automatically going to trigger once we click next. So that's the key concept of prototyping animations in Adobe XD. So then the intended result is that this is going to rotate, this is going to become smaller, and then the triangle is going to rotate and it's going to become larger. So we're going to see that. So I'm just going to go here, and then to preview your prototype, you just click on the screen that you want to start with and click the play button. And then you can click next, and then yay, it works. So now we need to prototype. Just gonna mute my speakers for a second. So now we got prototype the back button to go back to this pink state over here. And to do that, we're just gonna click this back component that we have here, and we're gonna link it back. So the same way that we made the next button go to this screen. And we're gonna, oh, it looks like it's already auto-animate by default and 1 second. So I can run the prototype. So it's gonna click next, and then you can click back and it will go. So yeah, looks like it's working pretty well. And this can be really helpful for hackathon projects too, because it's pretty quick to do. And it's also, depending on the design you want and the interaction that you have, it could really like give a higher level of fidelity and craft and execution to score those points on the judges' scorecards. So yeah, that's something that you can do. Yeah. So yeah, that's like the basics of using Auto-Animate and prototyping micro interactions in Adobe XD. You can also do like some other cool effects. Like I think in the first example, I actually had text and I made it so that the text slid in and out and faded out. It's 8:50 right now. I'm just being mindful of the time. I can sort of talk about that. So for this one, essentially how I made it was, let me disable the grid. I had this as a default text, and then inside the actual layer, where are my layers? There are my layers. So inside the layers here, I actually had two, inside this artboard, I actually had two text layers. So this layer that you see here is visible, and that's this one. I also had a second one that I kept in the frame, but I slid out slightly and I lowered the opacity to 0%. So you can see here that it's like that. And essentially what I did was I duplicated this. When I duplicated this artboard, the text layers were still here. And I placed this text layer outside. Or actually, it's still in the artboard, but it's just off to the side. And then I made the opacity at 0%. And then this text, which was previously the text over here out on the outside, I positioned in the center and I lifted the opacity up to 100%. So that's how you get the effect. Whoops. So that when you go in here, yeah, it just slides out. So it's like a smooth transition. This could be nice if you're like prototyping like an onboarding flow and you want the text to go in really nicely. So yeah, that's that. For prototyping, let me go back to my slides. Yeah, so I just wanted to end this off with a bit of general career advice for those of you wondering who want to get into product design. So generally for your case studies that you're going to put on your portfolio, which are going to be your projects, I would typically advise going for like 3 to 4 case studies. And ideally, you would want to have projects that span desktop and mobile. And for mobile, you would want to ideally have both iOS and Android, just to show that you know how to design for both systems. And then typically, like I know we've seen like, or at least for those of you who are familiar with like portfolio case studies, we typically frame it like there are people who frame it like with some research and then they go into like some personas and then a wireframe and then the user flow. And while that's great, also it'll be great to focus on design decisions. So explaining specifically why you designed a feature a certain way, like what use case were you trying to optimize for, or was there some fact from the research that you dug up that motivated you to want to accommodate for this and design for this specific need of the user? So that's one thing to focus on. And then another thing is you want to make sure that in your case study, you're covering product thinking, interaction design, and visual design. So what that is product thinking is maybe like identifying like the product market fit. So like how does this address like a user need and why? Interaction design is you can think of it at a very basic level. You can think of it as flow. So how do I go from one state to another? And then how do I go back? So what's the previous state? What's the current state? And what's the next state? So you definitely want to consider that. And like entry points for like features, like how will users access certain features and where in the specific flow, and rationale for that. And then the last part is visual design, which is essentially measuring like your craft and execution. So we're talking about like design systems. There's like components, so like your ability to make components, typography, color, white space. So very visual stuff. I'm seeing there's stuff in the Q&A. Is there any way to check?
Yeah. So the first question is, can this be converted to HTML, CSS, JavaScript coding after I design in Adobe XD? And if I want to add into my project work, if so, how?
That I think at the moment that's something that XD doesn't really have. I know that Figma has where like if you click on a certain component, it'll tell you the specific properties. But here, I think the motion part, it doesn't really translate into code. There might be a plugin that you can look into. I might actually like try to research that up myself later on. But the closest you can get for like text components and stuff is you can obviously just look at the width and the height and the X and Y position. That's probably like very helpful. And then you can copy the hex code over here into the code. But yeah, I think like from the motion aspect, I don't think there's anything that translates into code, but I can look into that and let you know. in the Discord.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Another question is, would you recommend Adobe XD to make better UIs for mobile development?
Adobe XD make better UIs for mobile development. I guess like better in what sense? I guess like personally, like if you're looking for, I guess like fundamentals, like if all you're looking to do is like flesh out the flow of something and you're not looking to get into like the nitty-gritty details of what I did here, which was like micro interactions, that is like this is more like craft and execution. It's just on a higher level of granularity, higher level detail. So I guess like if you want your hackathon prototype to be higher detail with motion, like I would recommend XD. If not, you could still use XD, the prototype, just like a general flow. But there's also, if you want, you can also consider Figma.
Thank you. A random question, what mouse are you using?
What mouse am I using? I'm literally using like, I don't even know. I think I got it from Walmart.
Okay. This might be a dumb question, but like, how do I create case studies? I've never created case studies before, so where do I start?
Where do I start? Okay. So okay, so I guess this kind of ties in with, I think I was just about to kind of touch base on this, but basically a case study is like a project. So you're making, so it's basically like something that you're making for a hackathon like this for TOHacks. And you could write a case study about that. A case study pretty much defines, so pretty much it defines problem, like at a super high level. It touches base on what problem that you're trying to solve, as well as who is the product for, right? And then talk a bit about your process, right? So like from rough stages to polished designs, essentially. And that's sort of like the like super high level. That's sort of like the super like rough way or format to make a case study. And then lastly, you might want to show like a prototype. So you might like want to screen record. So you have a certain flow that you prototyped in XD or Figma, and then you can use like screen recording software, record that and upload all of that to your website. So that's sort of like the building blocks of making a case study. I don't know if I answered your question, but I hope that helped.
Thanks, Jasper. And does Figma also have similar micro animation features?
Yeah, so Figma has something called Smart Animate, but Smart Animate is not quite the same as Auto-Animate. It's here I can type it out. It's called Smart Animate, and you can apply the same principles, but the outcome might not be the same because I think Figma's engine for Smart Animate is just it just runs a little bit differently. So, like for example, it might have something here that rotates. Like for Figma, it might not make it rotate. It'll just like kind of like transition into this other piece without rotating. So for like micro interactions, I would recommend like XD over Figma. But yeah, you can also look into some Figma plugins. I think there's one called Figmotion, which might give you a little bit more control of like the details if you really want to use Figma. So you can look into that. And I see there's a question here. Can I write my case studies on my resume? Usually case studies are put in a portfolio. So you usually put case studies in a portfolio, and then your resume will just be like your work experience. You can also talk a little bit about your project by giving like a brief description in it, but I definitely wouldn't recommend like you going through like all the details of this that I wrote out and putting it in your resume because you'll go over like 5 pages probably.
Awesome. Another question was, can you easily transition a file between the two from XD to Figma and vice versa?
So I feel like you can copy Figma into Adobe XD, but I'm not sure about copying XD to Figma. Like I don't really remember actually, but I know you can do like one, you can go from one to the other, but not from one to another, something like that. But yeah, you can experiment it. Like I might actually just give it a shot right now.
While you're doing that, Jasper, I guess there's
Mhm.
another question. Do you need
Yeah.
to be good at drawing to become a product designer?
The answer to that is absolutely no, because unless you want to like get into illustration more, but illustration is typically like a separate field altogether from product design. Usually illustrators like support product designers on real teams, but essentially with product design, you're pretty much working with typography, so like text, and your understanding of hierarchy as well as um, components, so like buttons and form fields, that sort of stuff. So ideally, like you would just have to have you would just need to have good visual sense in terms of visual design in order to like I guess succeed as a product designer. There are other aspects too, like interaction design. So you would have to get good at that as well. But speaking strictly in terms of visual design, like you would just need to have good visual sense for like layout, hierarchy, and a good understanding of user intentions.
For sure. Um, Another question just came up. What makes a good micro animation?
Good micro animation is here, yeah. Oh yeah, and to answer the previous question, I think you can only copy from XD to Figma because I'm trying to copy from Figma to XD. I don't think it works. Let me try putting in a frame. If I copy the whole frame, does it work? No. So I think it only works if you go one way. Yeah, so you can copy from XD to Figma because I was able to get all this inside. But I think it copies it as a PNG image. So just be aware of that. And the other question was,
What makes a good micro animation?
what makes a good micro animation? Yeah, so I guess a good micro animation is one that's not too, like it doesn't go too fast, but it doesn't go too slow. So in this example, okay, so like in this example, this was the speed that I went with. So it wasn't too fast and it wasn't too slow. But say if we were to make this faster, so to control that, I would probably adjust duration. So say like if this was like 0.3, right? And if you prototype that, like you'll notice that it goes like really fast, like really janky like that. Like you might want that for certain scenarios, like if you want to be super responsive, but generally this is kind of like it's kind of sharp. It's kind of harsh on the eyes. So yeah, a lot of it is based off of timing, and truth be told, it's probably something that is practiced. I would recommend like going on Dribble and like searching up like micro animations and interactions just to get a sense of like what good timing is. Like I feel even here might be able to go 0.5. I think 0.5 will still look okay, but 0.3 would look a little bit, it'll be too fast and the user would just like miss it. So you want it to be not too slow, but not too fast, essentially. Hope that helps.
Thank you. And one question. So for someone who's just getting acquainted to Adobe XD, do you have some like resources or like recommendations on how someone can, I guess, get more experience?
Yeah, so for one, like YouTube tutorials, there are a lot of YouTube tutorials on Adobe XD like tricks, like kind of like what I did. Um, like someone, for example, if you wanted to do like a number scramble animation, like in a combination lock, you can also search up how to do that. Um, Other than that, I think something I recommend is if you go up into file, get UI kits. You can actually get legitimate UI kits from Windows and Apple,
Hmm.
which is helpful for like if you're designing for iPhone. Yeah, so these are developer resources. So then if you want a button that complies with iOS guidelines, you can like click on it. Like you can like literally copy and paste the button from the file, and all you have to do is just download the file on this website. So yeah, they have one for XD here. So that's something I'll recommend.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm.
Awesome. Um, I think those are all the questions. So Jasper, I don't know if you want to show that last slide. I think you had one more.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I was like in the middle of talking about this. I think the last thing I just wanted to say is that like if you have real projects from work or from a hackathon or at least something that you designed that was shipped out in code, so a developer actually made it, those are typically more valued than like speculative projects from like school or yourself, just because it shows that like you worked in a team and you figured out like technical feasibility of a design. So that's definitely very important in the real world. And I just wanted to cap off, I think, by saying thanks. Thanks for attending my session. And if you want to chat and if you want to just get in touch, I'm on Instagram and Twitter. That's my handle, Jasper_Tu. And my LinkedIn is also here as well. So feel free to connect with me there as well. And thank you.